Hi, today we are going to talk about A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf was a modern writer. She lived in the 20th century, and she was one of the pioneers who introduced the stream of consciousness method. She belonged to the second wave of feminism, where the first wave of feminism focused mainly on the political rights of women. The second wave of feminism looked more at the social conditions, and this reflected very much in the literature that came up during this period. So having this in mind, we'll quickly look at the major works of hers and move into the work prescribed for study. Her major works include Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, Waves, Orlando, and one of the characteristic works of feminism is A Room of One's Own. A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf claims, is an extended essay. She says that this essay was inspired by two of the lectures she delivered at certain universities on women and fiction. So in her attempt to trace the literary history of women, she came up to certain revelations, and that she shares in this work. So she narrates this incident in a very fictional way. She says that she was sitting at the Oxbridge campus, and that's when certain ideas came to her mind. Oxbridge is a combination of Oxford and Cambridge. And there, as she sat, she was surprised by the restrictions that were imposed on women. There were certain paths destined only for women. There was the library, which did not allow women without a consent, without a permission of a professor or a male person concerned. So with all these restrictions in mind, she went to the library, searched for the literary works of women, and she says she was amazed to see that not one woman writer's name could be found in that list of books. There were many books written about women by male writers, and she wondered how they could do that. So from this idea, she derives another idea of privacy. She says that for a woman to write, she needs a private room and financial independence. She looks at the literary history and she says that the women of the 18th and 19th century, the women writers, were not much known except for a few names. That could be the reason. The reason could be they did not have any privacy for themselves, and they had many social restrictions imposed on them. So this private room where a woman had the freedom to experiment herself, where the woman had the freedom to write whatever she felt like writing, was lacking. There was also this lack of financial independence because women were not working. She says that she was fortunate enough to have an aunt who gave her a fortune of so much pounds. So with this introduction, she moves into the essay by introducing certain fictional characters. Even though The Room of One's Own deals with the real life incidents of women, she has used a lot of fictional characters here. The first fictional place was what we mentioned before, the Oxbridge campus. And she introduces the names of a lot of women writers, Mary Baton, Mary Seton, Mary Carmichael. She gives a lot of names like this. And then she says that she would like to illustrate this using an example of an imaginary sister of Shakespeare. She gives her an imaginary name, Judith Shakespeare. Let's watch a small animation video on Judith Shakespeare. You must have watched the video, the short video on Judith Shakespeare. Now, as you saw there, she had to commit suicide. Now, what were the factors that led to that? Judith Shakespeare, Virginia Woolf begins the section of Judith Shakespeare by quoting a bishop whose name is not mentioned. She quotes him saying that he once said that cats do not go to heaven, so do women do not write fiction. So that was the attitude people had towards these women during this time. So, coming to Judith Shakespeare, William Shakespeare was a person who, in her account, in Virginia Woolf's account, who was a wild man. He went wild very often, he poached rabbits, he was, from his childhood onwards, he behaved in a very wild manner. However, he got his primary education, he continued his education, and later, when he wanted to pursue theatre as his dream, he went out of his land, he went to London, he stood there with certain stage managers and later became a playwright himself. That was the privilege that Shakespeare had in spite of the financial difficulties, certain financial difficulties he faced. Judith Shakespeare, according to Virginia Woolf, was an equally talented woman. She says that one of the factors that characterizes this is the gender inequality. While Shakespeare went wild in his dreams, Judith Shakespeare could not afford to do that. She was not given a primary education. There was no formal education, yet she decided to learn things on her own. She wanted to read. She took the books of her brother and started reading. At times, when certain verses came to her mind, she must have noted it down somewhere. And Virginia Woolf very eloquently says that she must have done that on a small piece of apple or something that she was working with. But she was discouraged from doing all that. Her family, when she was out of her teens, decided that she should get married. And they tried to fix the marriage with a person nearby, a woolstapler's son. She didn't want to marry, she wanted to write, but that did not happen. And when her father, who loved her so much, insisted that she should marry, she should do the household work, along with that, the social constraints also were imposed upon her. Now, this led her to a different state of mind. She wanted to get out of all these. So, just as wild as Shakespeare was, she also decided to elope. She eloped to London in that state of mind. Now, there in London, just like her brother, she decides to go to a theatre. She goes to certain company managers. She asks them if they would give her a chance to act. They all laughed at her. And finally, one actor manager made use of her. his name is mentioned as Nick Green. Now these are all fictional names which are not mentioned anywhere in history. So this Nick Green got her pregnant, and finally the only option before her was to commit suicide, and Virginia Woolf says that she was found to be left on the crossroads of London. Now, it is important to look at the ultimate plight that such women as Judith Shakespeare had to face. Either they had to face death as the ultimate plight, or Virginia Woolf says that those women who were tagged as witches, or those women who were defined as wise women selling herbs, or those anonymous poems written by people somewhere, all these could be women. There are possibilities that these were all women. They were either the lost novelist or the unheard poet. It could be women of those ages. Another important thing that we need to look at is the notion of chastity. Chastity is something which is always imposed on women. Not that it is not a good thing, but then chastity was given certain religious importance during those times. Now, looking at Judith Shakespeare, what would have led her to end her life would be this idea of chastity. She would not have known how to survive after being raped by this actor-manager and after being made pregnant. So, this notion of chastity is again another huge burden that is laid only on women, which Virginia Woolf says is equally applicable to men as well. Another thing that we need to look at is the anonymity of writers. As we said before, all these anonymous poems, all these anonymous ballads would have been the songs created by these women to be sung to their children, or the stories that women told their children would have been the creative mind of the women of these ages. Now, Virginia Woolf moves into one more thing. She says that the subjective nature of truth is what makes her say all this. She says that when we look at fiction, fiction is never considered as factual. Fiction is different from facts. But she says she has used this fictional character because she would like to say truth which she would not be allowed to do. Now, taking Virginia Woolf's life, Virginia Woolf's personal life, if you read the biography, you understand that she was not a very bold woman as she says all these. Initially, during her early ages, she was used by one of the persons who lived nearby. She also had to undergo all the struggles that women underwent. But her parents were very supportive in this. Her father was the one who encouraged her to write. So considering the social condition of women and herself during that time, she had only one resort to adopt to, and that was resorting to fiction. So the fictional characters that she has used here have relevance. They are not merely stories, but they have a lot of truth in it. I caught her. Lies told by me are often filled with truth. So she justifies her use of fictional characters in this argument that she makes. We can also see that there are a lot of allusions in this particular extract. She refers to that bishop who says that cats do not go to heaven, so do women, don't write fiction. There's also another reference to the Greek writers like Horace, Virgil, Ovid. There are also references to George Eliot, George Sand, women who write under male tags, male names, because they feared that their works would not be published if they wrote under the name of a woman. So all these matters she addresses in this particular excerpt from Room of One Song. Thank you, and we'll have further discussion in the classes to come. Thank you.